and welcome to tonight's Saturday Night Scares. Scary stories for adults and brave teens. I'm Kelly, a librarian from the Public Library of Youngstown and Mahoning County, and tonight's selection is an original unpublished piece called A Stormy Evening. Carl was late for dinner. It wasn't his fault, really. I'm sure my sweet Elena will understand. She's an angel, he thought to himself. It had been humid all day, and he sighed as he felt the first drops of rain begin to fall. He was still about 20 minutes away from home on foot, and he quickened his pace down the street as the warm rain began to fall around him. He bobbed and weaved down the sidewalk in a feeble attempt to avoid the rain under the palm trees that lined the streets. It had already been a long day, made longer when he had to cover for another radiology tech at the hospital. He didn't mind his job. It was very different from the work he used to do in Germany, which he had left under circumstances he didn't like to discuss. He liked to tell people different stories about his life in Germany, usually very vague, and each slightly different from the last. He liked his coworkers, but wanted to maintain an emotional distance from them. Although people were more easygoing and tolerant here down in Key West, Florida, he didn't like them asking too many questions. When pressed, he would try to steer the conversation to where he lived now. For him, Key West was paradise. The climate in Florida and laid-back vibe in Key West was very different from his hometown in Germany, and that suited him just fine. And the hospital was a very special place for him. It was where he had met Elena. She had been admitted due to illness, and Carl got lost in her eyes the moment they met. She was a vision, the literal girl of his dreams, as he had dreamed of this woman years ago as his bride, and now she stood directly in front of him. She spent a short time in the hospital recovering, and Carl fondly recalled spending hours almost every night with her after his shift. It had been a whirlwind romance, and Carl was elated the day she left the hospital. The couple married a little over 2 years later, and despite the challenges of Elena's nagging illness and her family's dislike of him, they enjoyed a blissful life together. As he got closer to home, his thoughts turned to the last conversation he had tonight, just after his shift outside the hospital. After a long day at work, the last person he wanted to run into was Nana, his wife's sister. She wasn't a pleasant person generally, and tonight her demeanor matched the storm that seemed to be coming. Rainstorms in Key West seemed to blow in, rage for a little while, and blow back out, moving along to annoy someone else, somewhere else. He was glad he was able to dismiss her relatively quickly and hoped that the rain beginning to drench him would disappear just as quickly. Finally turning down his street, he admired the row of houses leading up to his. As the lightning strikes provided brief illumination, he focused on the many different colored houses that formed a kind of tropical rainbow of Dade County pine homes, each complete with covered front porch and louvered window shutters. Glancing ahead as his house came into view, he winced as the lightning illuminated the repairs on the house that he had neglected for years. Soon, he thought, I'll get to them. But first I'll see if Elena has any ideas for changes she would like on the outside of the house. The rain began to increase in intensity as he turned off the street into his driveway. While the storm continued, the thoughts about his conversation with Nana and his house repairs disappeared as he bounded up the steps and onto his front porch. He paused at the door before entering and wondered what Elena was doing inside. He expected that she would have already eaten and that for him dinner would be long cold. He wasn't all that hungry, though, and looked forward more to getting inside and out of the escalating storm. This was the third time this week he was coming home late, so he slowly turned the doorknob and peered cautiously inside. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table, facing away from the door. If she heard him enter, she didn't respond. Still unsure of her attitude, Carl leisurely approached her from behind and softly addressed her, "Hi, honey, I'm home. How was your day?" and leaned in to kiss her on the cheek. She did not respond verbally, and Carl, after seeing an empty plate on the table where he usually sat, decided it best to head for the kitchen and prepare his dinner. Grabbing his dinner plate, he spun around toward the kitchen and glanced around the house. It was a small house, but he and Elena were comfortable there. Many times he had spoken to her of the possibility of adding children to the house, but with her lingering illness, he feared their dreams might remain just that. He loved the sound and feel of walking across the hardwood floor, and as he passed by the fireplace, he couldn't help but wonder again why so many homes in tropical Key West included fireplaces. Certainly more decorative than functional in this climate, he admitted that it did add a cozy charm to the house. Arriving at the kitchen, he opened the refrigerator and scrutinized its contents to determine his best option. "I better not spend too long in here," he thought, and decided a sandwich would be his quickest and easiest option. As he got at the bread, he began to ease back into conversation with Elena by discussing his day. "Today was a hard day, darling," he ventured. "I was very busy, and then Jeff called in that he would be a couple hours late." He debated internally whether to mention the conversation with Nana, and elected to leave that part out of the summary of his day. Then on the way home, this rain started and doesn't seem to be letting up. He figured if he just gave her a little time, her mood, like the rainstorm outside, would blow over and they would end up having a nice evening together. Carl didn't believe in the couple ever going to bed angry and would do what he needed to prevent that. Elena had experienced enough trouble in her life during the past few years, and Carl had vowed to never do anything to add to that experience. Both of Elena's parents had died recently, and Elena's first husband had left her for another woman after she suffered a miscarriage a few years before entering the hospital. Carl liked to think that her illness was a blessing in disguise, as it led to them meeting. He had been instantly smitten with her and recognized that she needed someone to care for her. He hadn't realized until meeting Elena how much he needed someone to care for and someone to care for him. He had stayed mostly to himself throughout his life to that point, and meeting her provided a glimpse into a better life, a life he could have with Elena. She did have a good relationship with her sister Nana, but Nana never fully accepted Carl and Elena's relationship. She thought he was taking advantage of her illness in some way and just would not warm to the positive impact Carl had made on Elena's life. They had been married now for almost 7 years, and Elena continued to struggle with her illness flaring up from time to time. With his medical training, Carl was better able to help Elena keep it in control, and she had not re-entered the hospital after the initial treatment. She deserved the best life he could provide, and Carl strived every day to make sure she received it. He finished preparing the sandwich and returned to the table with his plate. Elena still had not spoken a word, but her eyes seemed to follow him as he entered the dining room and sat down across from her. He made a strategic decision to just remain quiet while he ate, and instead let her dictate when and how she would be comfortable re-engaging him in conversation. He took his time eating, and when he finished, he decided enough time had passed to risk another conversation. He noticed the sound of the rain pelting the siding, roof, and windows of the house and exclaimed, "I didn't know we were expecting such a storm tonight." The words hung in the air, and the resulting silence lasted several seconds. Carl looked directly again at Elena and observed that her face seemed a little pale and tired. "That must be it," he thought. "Perhaps she is not as angry with me as it seems." And then another idea popped into his mind. "Are you feeling okay, honey? I'm sorry I was late, but I have an idea that I know will make you feel better." He leapt up and sprinted over to the turntable. Flipping through the vinyl albums, he found the one he was looking for, her favorite Cuban salsa record. Placing the record on the turntable, he set the needle down, and the music sprang to life. He thought he saw a look of her face brighten and floated toward her, hand extended. He took her hand and wrapped his other arm around her body. Lifting her from the chair, they began to glide around the room, the music punctuated with sporadic cracks of thunder. She fit nicely in his arms, and he felt her head nestle comfortably against his shoulder, and he smiled. As the music intensity increased, they began to move faster, swirling as they danced in the open space in the front of the house. Any passer by the front window, had they bothered to pause in the ever-escalating storm, would have seen the blissful sight of a couple in love, dancing in their living room to music they would not have heard. As the music neared the end, Carl wanted to finish with an artful flourish. He spun her in time with the notes ending and bent her down in a graceful dip. At the bottom of the dip, he paused. Did he hear voices in the street outside on a stormy night like this? They seemed to grow louder, and then a piercing crack of thunder outside the front of the door startled him, and he whirled around, Elena still in his arms, toward the front door. Lifting his head to look toward the door, he heard a tearing sound and then a resounding thump. Confused, he looked around the room and then finally down at his feet. And there he saw Elena's head, separated from the body still in his arms. It rolled a short distance away from his feet and came to rest with her face angled up toward him with a stunned expression. "Oh no, Elena," he exclaimed. He whispered gently to reassure her. "It's okay, darling. I know you don't feel well, but everything will be just fine. Let me take care of you. We'll get through this together. Now, where did I put the plaster and wax?" Carl had limited formal medical training, and this was certainly going to challenge his skills. This was no finger or toe again. His training and practical experience had enabled him to maintain Elena, but this repair was going to take some time. Lost in his thoughts and continuing to stare down at her head on the floor, in his mind he began to run through the steps he needed to take. The thunder cracked startlingly again outside, and he looked up at the door. He thought it strange that he could see lightning through the doorway. He snapped out of his concentration when he realized the door was open, and a group of people were barreling inside his house. He instantly recognized Elena's sister, Nana, and his heart sank. A group of men in uniform came in with her and moved quickly to surround him. They had guns pointed directly at him, and everyone seemed to be shouting. Nana's voice sliced through the cacophony of sound, and the men's voices seemed to fade away. "I knew it! All this time! Oh, you were always creepy, but this, I swear I thought I saw her through the window before, but you always denied it. I've been telling everyone for the past 7 years, and no one would listen. That's my sister!" Her tone then seemed to change slightly from shocked outrage to determined fury. "She came into the hospital 9 years ago. You seemed to latch onto her immediately, and your obsession only grew until the day she died. I thought that would be the end until I noticed you hanging around her mausoleum late at night. Since you never responded to your affections, it was strange you kept hanging around, and then her mausoleum was vandalized, and I knew it was you. For 7 years I suspected you did something, but this? And what did you do to her body? She looks so strange. I knew I saw her through your window, and you swore I was mistaken. You're sick. I hope you rot in jail." Slowly, Carl began to understand what the policemen were saying to him, and he complied with their commands. He gently lowered Elena to the floor and put his hands behind his back. One of the policemen handcuffed him and began to quickly usher him to the front door. As he shuffled out the front door, Carl swiveled his head around again to see Elena once more lying in 2 pieces on the floor. "I only have a few hours to reattach her head before it's too late. Don't worry, Elena. I'll clear this up and be back in no time. I love you, darling." He didn't notice the other faces in the room, and even if he did, he wouldn't be able to comprehend the alternating looks of shock and disgust. This concludes our view into the lives of Carl and Elena, a love that lasted beyond death. That's quite a story, huh? I bet you'd call that story unbelievable, and there you would be wrong. This story you heard is a dramatization of a real-life love story which occurred in Key West, Florida throughout the 1930s. The true story is even more unreal. Carl, or Carl Tanzler, or sometimes Count Carl von Cosel, met Elena, full name Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, in April of 1930 when she was brought to the hospital by her mother for an exam, resulting in her diagnosis of tuberculosis. Carl was born in Germany in 1877. Around 1920, he married a woman named Doris and had 2 children. Carl emigrated from Germany to the United States in 1926, settled in Zephyr Hills, Florida, and was later joined by his wife and 2 daughters. Then in 1927, he left his family behind in Zephyr Hills and moved to Key West, Florida, where he took a job as a radiology technician under the name Carl von Cosel. Elena was a Cuban-American born in 1909. She had 2 sisters, older sister Nana and younger sister Celia. She also had been married before meeting Carl. In 1926, she married Luis Mesa, who left her after she suffered a miscarriage. Elena was still legally married to Luis at the time of her death. Carl and Elena met when Elena came to the hospital as a result of her tuberculosis. She was never officially admitted to the hospital for treatment, but Carl subsequently attempted to treat her for the next year and a half at Elena's home. They spent a significant amount of time together, and from all accounts, Carl grew quite fond of Elena. It is said that Elena did not reciprocate these feelings, but that did not deter Carl. Unfortunately, he was unable to cure her, and she passed away in her home in October 1931. But of course, that is not the end of the story. At this point, accounts differ slightly in the details regarding the events after Elena's death. Before his death in 1952, Carl provided his version of events in the pulp publication Fantastic Adventures, published in September of 1947. Based on his actions regarding Elena, however, one can easily imagine how his reliability as a narrator may be in question. On Elena's death in 1931, Carl paid for her funeral and commissioned the construction of an above-ground mausoleum in the Key West Cemetery. He visited almost every night, and he claimed she visited him, spoke and sang to him, and asked him to take her home. Finally, one night in April 1933, he did just that, moving her body from the mausoleum and taking Elena to his home. After 2 years in the mausoleum, her body had deteriorated significantly, and Carl set to work to reconstruct her. His laboratory was fashioned inside of an old, wingless airplane. He used a variety of components to do so, such as piano wire, rags, silk cloth, plaster of Paris, wax, disinfectants, preserving agents, and finally topped off with perfume. I'll leave the grisly details for you to seek out on your own. They may be a little too scary for this evening, but several photos exist of Elena before and after, if you dare to look at them. The confrontation described allegedly occurred 7 years after Carl brought Elena home. Her sister had heard rumors of Elena being seen at Carl's house, specifically that they were participating in typical married couple activities, such as dancing in front of an open window and other nighttime romantic activities. The police arrested Carl at his home, and the case was eventually dropped, and Carl was free to return home, though this time without Elena. For his part, Carl claimed the actions to be scientific in nature and that he had done nothing wrong. He had constructed a laboratory, and all his efforts were an attempt to resurrect her life. Elena's dying wish was that she and Carl could live together, he claimed, and he was simply trying to honor that last request. He had dreamed of Elena as his lost bride long before meeting her, and having finally found her, could not bear to lose her again. When viewed from his perspective, it provides hope that perhaps love can, in fact, conquer death. Well, that's all we have tonight for Saturday Night Scares. Join us next Saturday night for another scary story, if you dare.